All right. Most of us are familiar with the Dallas Police Department incident in which a Dallas police officer refused to allow NFL player Ryan Moats to be at his mother-in-law's bedside as she passed away at the hospital. Lesser known is a case that occurred in Memphis, Tennessee just days later and received much less media coverage because the person wasn't famous that was victimized here. On an early morning in March in 2009, a Shelby County Sheriff's deputy initiated a traffic stop on a vehicle that had an expired tag. The driver of that automobile's mother was in the back seat of the car, and it was in an obviously deteriorating state. Now, although the traffic stop occurred less than 1 mile from the hospital, the overzealous deputy refused to allow the driver to continue on to the hospital and instead forced him to wait on the side of the road while he completed writing a traffic citation. The deputy did do the violator the favor of calling an ambulance out there, but the ambulance arrived a little late and the driver's mother was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, neither of these officers did anything illegal. They were both conducting routine traffic patrol services when they came into contact with the two individuals, and both of those individuals were on the way to the hospital, and both traffic stops were conducted for a lawful reason. But a very important question is raised when we look at these two cases. Should our desire to enforce violations of criminal laws outweigh our human right to use a little bit of common sense in the execution of our duties? Now, everybody sitting in this room has been in public service for quite some time now. At some point in your life, you made a decision to become a law enforcement officer. And what was it that motivated you to become a police officer? And what is it that motivates you every day to stay in law enforcement? Now, we'll all probably have different answers to that question, but I believe the underlying reason that we all became police officers is because on some level, we enjoy helping people out. Now, as a law enforcement officer for the last 10 years, and more recently as a college student, I've had the opportunity to look at different studies on officer-citizen contact, some of the problems that are associated with those interactions. I'd like to encourage all of you to review the way you deal with people on a daily basis and remember the reasons you got into this line of work to begin with. In 2008, a study was conducted on communication by several university professors from around the world, and one of the most common complaints these professors came up with was that officers demonstrated a rude and often arrogant communication style. Now, although this communication style is often meant by the officer to portray control of the situation and sometimes with professionalism, the resulting image is often quite to the contrary. The portrayed message in turn results in a lack of trust on law enforcement and an unwillingness on the part of the public to cooperate with law enforcement in criminal investigations. Now, on a routine day here in Lowndes County, there are approximately 550 calls for service. The most recent census reporting for Lowndes County tells us there's 104,000 people that live in this area. During the work week, that number jumps to around 200,000. So when you break those numbers down and look at the overall numbers, the majority of people in our community will only have one encounter with a law enforcement officer over the course of the year. That's a very limited opportunity for a person to make an informed decision about the quality of service that we as officers are providing to our citizens. All right, now we've briefly discussed the public mistrust of law enforcement and the very limited opportunity that we as officers have to change that public image. So you may be asking yourself, well, what is it that we can do? Well, the simple answer is just use the golden rule, all right? So the one you learned in elementary school, do unto others as you would like to have done unto yourself. A simple smile, maybe a hello while you're walking into a gas station would maybe help change the perception of law enforcement officers. Holding open a door for somebody when you get out to maybe eat lunch or something, or get a soda, will completely change the way an individual feels about the sheriff's office and police officers in general. Other ways that we can change public perception of law enforcement officers is through basic common sense. The majority of people that we as officers come into contact with on a daily basis occurs on traffic stops. I would submit to you that of the total population that we stop for traffic offenses, only 10% of them are truly what you would call a hardcore offender. By that I mean a DUI, suspended license, maybe a narcotics violator. The other 90% of the people that you deal with are just going to be your normal everyday Joe citizens that have made an error in their driving judgment and might just need a little reminder. Not every person that gets pulled over needs a stern lecture and a ticket. They don't all need to go to jail. Sometimes a smile, a little friendly reminder that they need to watch their driving is enough to accommodate our needs to enforce the law. Regardless of what you decide you need to do to improve the public image of our officers, every little bit will help. People tend to distrust members of dissimilar groups and may perceive them as threatening. For example, in police-civilian interactions, members of the public tend to see the badge and the uniform that we wear rather than the individual behind that stuff. However, studies that police officers who are willing to take the time to show kindness, understanding, and consideration when interacting with others, especially those who may be distrustful, that will likely foster a more positive atmosphere. This means a greater likelihood for cooperation. We as officers should prefer to use our communication skills to effect voluntary compliance whenever possible, rather than having to resort to physical coercion. Providing a friendly response and a helpful attitude will not just benefit the public, we as officers will benefit as well. Over my 10 years of law enforcement, I've met numerous people along the way who have helped me out just because of the way I dealt with them in my capacity as a law enforcement officer. Deputy Bruce and Sergeant Shore obtained permission to use a hunting reserve halfway across the country just because of the way they dealt with a man who had broken down on the highway. Their friendly handling of a man that they might never have seen again may have fostered the beginnings of a friendship that could last for years to come. And we have discussed the need for a change in attitude from our officers, some ways that you can operate to affect that change, and the benefits that common courtesy will have on both you and the public. I would now like to ask you all to consider a change in your handling of your day-to-day encounters with people. A wonderful resource for understanding the way that citizens feel about law enforcement is a book entitled The Role of Police in a Changing Society. In this book by Mr. Aparna, different community perception problems and community interaction solutions are discussed at length, as well as numerous studies that were performed into the matter. Every one of us has an opportunity to change the way that people feel about law enforcement. It's hard that we have to deal with the negative media image every day anyway. Media portrayal of law enforcement has helped perpetuate the negative image of the modern police officer. If every one of us made a difference in one person's life every day, regardless of how simple the gesture, we might start to find that public trust in our office would not be influenced by what's seen on the 6 o'clock news every night. Think back to the Dallas police officer who stopped the NFL player. Recall the story of the Memphis officer who stopped the man for the expired tag. Is there some way that those officers might have been able to accomplish their law enforcement tasks with a little common sense that may have helped change the outcome of the situation? I submit to you that by using a little common sense and a little bit of courtesy, we can all change the community perception of our office and make doing our job just a little bit easier.